Kenya and France have maintained strong diplomatic relations since 1963, when France was among the first countries in the world to recognize Kenya's independence, for which we are truly grateful. Over the years, this partnership has evolved into a broad and strategic engagement across multiple sectors. France is one of Kenya's leading economic partners, with strong portfolio of investments supported through the French Development Agency, particularly in renewable energy, urban mobility, and climate-related projects. Our cooperation also extends to education, skills development, and innovation. Through partnerships between Kenya and France and French institutions, as well as the FD-supported programs, we are strengthening technical training, higher education, research capacity, and many other areas to support Kenya's industrial and technological transformation. We have held extensive bilateral discussions aimed at deepening cooperation in trade and investment, particularly in manufacturing, renewable energy, pharmaceuticals, digital innovation, and agro-industrial development. Kenya is a competitive production and logistics hub for East and Central Africa, supported by special economic zones and a growing industrial base. Kenya remains committed to deepening its partnership with France and advancing a forward-looking model of cooperation anchored in investment, mutual benefit, and shared responsibility. We view this summit as a turning point towards a more balanced, action-oriented, and results-driven Africa-France partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, I have extended our gratitude to President Macron for the confidence demonstrated in hosting the Fresh Africa Summit, the first ever to be hosted by an Anglophone country in Kenya. Mr. President, I want to promise you that we will not disappoint. And the confidence you have demonstrated in Kenya confirms to you that you have friends on this other side. And you can count on our partnership, you can count on our friendship, and you can count on our collaboration and cooperation. As part of the strengthening of the strategic partnership between Kenya and France, our two countries today signed right here 11 instruments aimed at deepening cooperation across strategic sectors of our economies. Among the key instruments signed today is the rehabilitation and modernization of the 83 million euro or 12.5 billion Kenya shillings Nairobi commuter rail, which will serve as a central pillar of our urban transport modernization program. The Nairobi Commuter Rail 5 is expanding and upgrading key commuter rail corridors linking Nairobi to satellite towns such as Syokimau, Embakasi, Ruiru, and Kikuyu. New extensions, including the Ruto line, currently under construction, will further improve connectivity across our metropolitan city. In addition, we signed an agreement establishing a joint venture to develop and finance logistics and port infrastructure, an investment of $800 million. We also signed an agreement to facilitate the purchase of premium purple tea varieties and promote Kenya's specialty teas across French retail networks, creating opportunities for value addition and high income for our farmers. Mr. President, tomorrow at the dinner, we will be serving some Kenyan tea that looks like French wine. Today, I had the distinct honor and pleasure of welcoming President Emmanuel Macron on his official visit to Kenya. taking place at a historic moment as Kenya co-hosts Africa-France Summit in Nairobi under the theme Africa Forward, Africa Finance Partnership for Innovation and Growth. Kenya is deeply honored to host this summit, the first to be held outside France or a Francophone African country in more than 5 decades. This reflects the evolving nature of the Africa Finance Partnership and Kenya's growing role as a convener of regional and global dialogue. The summit brings together leaders, business people, investors, and innovators to advance practical cooperation in areas such as infrastructure, innovation, green growth, and development financing. We also emphasized the importance of enhancing air connectivity between Kenya and France to support growing trade, tourism, and business engagement. At present, limitations in frequency, capacity, and routing constrain the full potential of direct links between our two nations. These measures will directly support increased tourism arrivals from France, facilitate business and investment flows, and strengthen the movement of high-value exports, such as our fresh produce, flowers, and seafood to the European market, leveraging, of course, on our economic partnership agreement that is signed between Kenya and the European Union. We welcome the growing partnership between Kenya and France in advancing research, innovation, and digital skills through initiatives supported by the French Development Agency and the Pamoja program. President Macron and I agreed to strengthen cooperation in digital health, laboratory systems, and epidemic preparedness, including the improved use of real-time data for early detection and response. This will enhance healthcare delivery and strengthen Kenya's capacity to respond to future outbreaks, including managing our extensive program on universal health coverage in Kenya. We also welcome the deepening cooperation in education and skills development, particularly in STEM and technical and vocational education and training. The state-of-the-art University of Nairobi Engineering and Science Complex, at a cost of 35 million euro, is now moving into implementation phase with the designs finalized, procurement underway, and contractor onboarding expected later this year. Just for your information, Mr. President, Nairobi University is my alma mater. So, at the same time, the Higher Education Engineering Equipment Support Project will equip 4 of our universities with modern engineering laboratories and equipment for mechanical, electrical, and civil engineering training. These investments will expand hands-on training, strengthen teaching capacity, and produce the skilled engineers and technicians needed to drive Kenya's industrial growth. And we can share this very high skilled labor, Mr. President, with France if we establish official, structured channels of overseas employment of Kenyans. We reaffirmed our shared commitment to multilateralism, climate action, and the reform of the global financial architecture to ensure fair and predictable access to financing for developing countries. I want to thank you, Mr. President, that you have undertaken that we will have a robust conversation on Tuesday on how France can work with us and work with the rest of the G7 on how to enhance African financial institutions, including ATIDI, so that we can use those institutions to leverage more resources from our pension funds, from our insurance companies, to make resources available for development of infrastructure and other facilities in our continent. We also agreed that the Africa-France Summit must move beyond dialogue to implementation with a clear focus on investment, innovation, and partnerships that deliver measurable results. We are confident that the outcomes of this summit will strengthen economic cooperation, mobilize financing, and support Africa's development priorities. We can speak for ourselves as Africans, and to congratulate President Macron for having the courage to recalibrate the relationship between Africa and France, to make it more inclusive. It's not about Anglophone, Francophone. I think to broaden the conversation, make it much more inclusive, broaden the engagement, make the engagement mutually beneficial with shared responsibility. We understand as African leaders that we too have responsibilities. This relationship is not going to be one-sided. We will be expecting from France as they will be expecting from us. And they will be giving as much as we are giving. That is the win-win, mutually beneficial relationship. And that relationship that President Macron is now championing, a relationship of equals, is the correct template for our relationship. Not thinking about aid and loans, but thinking more about investments and about what Africa can offer. We have real assets. We have young people, demographic dividend. We have natural resources. We have energy resources. These resources count for something, and we want a balanced relationship, and that is what this Nairobi summit is about, and that is what the Nairobi Declaration will be about. And I want to be very clear that what President Macron is doing, recalibrating this relationship, is actually what we want as Africans. This is how we want the relationship to be going into the future. And finally, on the challenges we have at the Strait of Hormuz and the problems we have, I was having consultations with my fellow heads of state earlier today from Sierra Leone, from Senegal, and all of us are affected. Fuel prices, oil prices have gone up by between 20 and 30%. We've just come out of COVID. We've suffered the consequences of the war in the middle of Europe, and now we have another situation. For those of us on the receiving end, because this is no longer about 2 or 3 or 5 countries. It's about many countries and many people and millions of people. The sooner we find a resolution, the better for all of us. It is our very strong belief and urge that the people concerned should not just consider their interests, they should also consider the interests of millions who today are paying the price of the war in that corner. So whatever that can be done should be done so that we find a resolution and we find a ceasefire and we find a resolution of the conflict there. And President Macron and your colleagues in the EU, you please deploy your diplomacy and all other assets that you have to see how we can bring this to the relationship between Kenya and France is a relationship between friends. And France has interests in Kenya, and Kenya has interests in a relationship with France. And I have said this is a relationship that has been built since our independence. France has been our friend. It's among the first countries to recognize Kenya's independence, and they have walked with us that journey ever since. And therefore, We have relationships with other countries. We have relationships with other partners. But the relationship with France is special. Special because there is a very personal relationship between President Macron, myself, and Kenya. And that relationship has earned us the place where we are today. The first summit signaling a shift to a broader, much more inclusive relationship with Africa, recalibrated with the understanding of respect for sovereignty, being a relationship that is mutually beneficial, and a relationship that recognizes Africa's position and priorities is what we are having here. And President Macron chose Kenya because of that very special relationship. And number two is because we have a robust development program between France and Kenya. France has supported our energy generation. France has supported health issues in our country, transport issues in our nation. We've just signed off education, a robust education program that will cover our universities and our TVETs, very well aligned with the priorities of my administration and the priorities of Vision 2030, Kenyan Vision. On the airport, we have agreed on what to do in the airport space. We have agreed on what to do on agriculture space, smart agriculture. We share very common positions on the reform of the international financial architecture. I have taken time to brief my brother, President Macron, on the National Infrastructure Fund, a mechanism we established recently, and how they can participate so that we can leverage more resources. And I'm truly grateful that he has offered to work with us and work with the Africa Development Bank, which I met early today, to assist ATIDI, which is our insurance facility, so that mechanisms such as the National Infrastructure Fund, which targets Kenya's development, can be assisted to leverage private sector resources, pension resources, insurance resources, crowding in with other partners so that we can have adequate resources to run our development program. And therefore, this Africa-French Summit and the bilateral relations between Africa and France speaks to Kenya's transformation, because the tenets and the aspirations of the summit and the relationship between France and Kenya and the relationship between President Macron and myself are very key to unlocking the potential for us to be able to drive our development. And I have briefed my brother, President Macron, on matters to do with transport and logistics, energy, and agricultural transformation. You have been following what I have been canvassing in Kenya, and those are the three primary areas of investment that we are targeting if we are to move Kenya to a first world country.
And I'm pleased to come back on Nairobi 7 years after my first trip, my first official visit in your country, and it was the first visit ever of a French president. And which was honestly completely crazy to imagine. But the past 7 years have been quite a journey, I have to say. We did a lot together, and we increased our relationships from bilateral point of view, but as well we increased our intimacy. And we always appreciated your commitment to African and global issues. And this is why we decided to have this African Forward Summit being organized here in Nairobi, and thank you very much for that.